A deep underground bunker, reinforced with steel and concrete, built specifically to survive the worst that modern warfare could deliver. Gone. Not damaged, not breached. Gone. Reduced to rubble in a matter of seconds by a single Russian missile traveling at Mach-9. And not one NATO air defense system detected it in time to do anything about it. Welcome to Legal Lens USA. I am your host, David Reynolds. What you are about to hear is not conjecture, not speculation, and it is certainly not the version of events you will find on your evening news broadcast. This is the story of a weapon that has fundamentally rewritten the rules of underground warfare, and of a strike that has sent shockwaves through every NATO defense ministry from Washington to Warsaw. If you are new here, hit that like button and subscribe right now, because we cover developments like this before anyone else does. And more importantly, we break them down in a way that actually makes sense to people who understand that the official story is rarely the complete story. The conversation inside NATO corridors right now is not calm. It is not measured. Behind closed doors, in the kind of briefings that never make it to press conferences, senior military planners are confronting a reality that challenges everything they believed about hardened infrastructure and the survivability of underground command architecture. For decades, the doctrine was simple. Go deep enough, reinforce sufficiently, and you survive. Bunkers built to withstand nuclear proximity detonations, facilities buried under hundreds of meters of earth and reinforced concrete, command centers designed to keep functioning through the most devastating conventional strikes imaginable. That doctrine is now in serious question, and the Russian military just provided the evidence that is driving that conversation. The facility in question was not a lightly protected installation. According to regional defense monitoring sources and open-source intelligence analysts tracking the conflict, the target represented exactly the kind of hardened underground infrastructure that NATO military doctrine has long classified as effectively survivable against conventional munitions. These are the facilities that planners point to when they talk about continuity of command, about maintaining operational coherence even under sustained bombardment. They are built into the earth itself, protected by layers of reinforced concrete that can measure meters thick, designed to absorb blast waves and redirect the force of conventional explosions around the protected core. The people inside these facilities are supposed to be safe. That is the entire point of their design. That is the enormous investment of resources and engineering they represent. And on the day that Russia's Kinzhal hypersonic missile system was tasked with this target, all of that investment, all of that engineering confidence, proved insufficient. Regional intelligence monitoring services and conflict analysts documented what followed in the minutes and hours after the strike. The facility that was supposed to survive did not survive. The command infrastructure that was supposed to remain functional was not functional. And the men who were supposed to be protected by hundreds of meters of earth and engineered concrete were not protected. The weapon responsible for this strike is called the Kh-47M2 Kinzhal. Its name translates from Russian as dagger, and the nomenclature is deliberately chosen. This is a weapon designed not to overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers, but to cut through them with precision and speed that renders conventional interception architectures effectively irrelevant. The Kinzhal is an air-launched ballistic missile, meaning it does not launch from a ground battery or a naval vessel, but from an aircraft, specifically the MiG-31K interceptor, or in more recent deployments, the Tu-22M3 strategic bomber. That launch platform distinction matters more than it might initially appear, because it fundamentally changes the detection and interception calculus that NATO air defense systems were built around. Most missile defense architecture is designed with a specific geometry in mind. Ground-based or sea-based launch points are relatively fixed. Radar networks can track them. Threat corridors can be modeled. Defense batteries can be pre-positioned to maximize interception probability along expected flight paths. An air-launched weapon changes all of that. The aircraft carrying the Kinzhal can maneuver extensively before releasing the missile, altering the effective launch point and therefore the threat vector in ways that ground-based radar networks struggle to account for in real time. The missile itself, once released, accelerates rapidly to its operational velocity. Russian military officials and defense analysts who have reviewed the system's documented performance parameters describe a weapon capable of reaching speeds between Mach-9 and Mach-12 in terminal flight phases. To understand what that means in practical terms, consider a standard interceptor missile, like those employed in Patriot air defense batteries. These systems are genuinely sophisticated. They represent decades of engineering development and billions of dollars of investment. They work by tracking an incoming threat, calculating its trajectory, and launching an interceptor that meets the incoming weapon at a predicted point in space. The entire system depends on having sufficient time to complete that sequence: detect, track, calculate, launch, intercept. At Mach 9, the Kinzhal is covering approximately 3 kilometers every single second. The time compression that creates is not just dramatic in an abstract sense. It is operationally decisive. Interception windows that might last 30 seconds against a subsonic cruise missile compress to windows measured in single-digit seconds against a weapon moving at these velocities. And the Kinzhal does not merely move fast. According to technical analysis from defense research institutions that have examined the weapon's flight profile, it also performs evasive maneuvers during its terminal approach phase. A conventional ballistic missile follows a predictable arc. Radar systems can model that arc and generate interception solutions with reasonable reliability. A weapon that maneuvers at hypersonic speeds during its final approach does not give those systems the predictability they require to function effectively. This is the engineering achievement that makes the Kinzhal categorically different from the weapons that existing NATO air defense networks were designed and calibrated to defeat. Then there is the penetrator warhead. Underground bunker destruction is not simply a matter of delivering explosive force in the general vicinity of a buried facility. The physics of underground protection mean that surface detonations, even very large ones, transmit only a fraction of their energy to deeply buried structures. The Earth itself absorbs and disperses blast energy. Effective bunker destruction requires a weapon that can physically penetrate into or through the protective earth and concrete before detonating, delivering energy directly to the structure rather than to the surrounding medium. The Kinzhal's warhead design incorporates this penetration capability, and when a weapon of this mass arrives at a hardened underground facility at terminal velocities approaching Mach 9, the kinetic energy alone represents a destructive force that engineering calculations for conventional bunker resistance simply did not account for. The combination of hypersonic terminal velocity, maneuvering capability degrading interception probability, and penetrating warhead design creates a weapons system that represents a genuinely new category of threat to infrastructure that NATO doctrine previously classified as survivable. The attribution question on this specific strike involves, as is standard in active conflict documentation, a degree of complexity that honest analysis must acknowledge. Russian Ministry of Defense statements confirmed the use of Kinzhal hypersonic missile systems in strikes targeting hardened underground military infrastructure, describing the destruction of command facilities as confirmed operational outcomes. Russian state media published reporting consistent with these claims, citing what they described as successful penetration of hardened underground installations. Independent conflict monitoring organizations tracking the war, including open-source intelligence analysts who have built significant credibility through documented accuracy on previous claims, reported physical evidence of strike impacts consistent with the described weapon system and target type. The question of whether Western defense establishments have privately reached conclusions that differ from their public statements is addressed, if indirectly, by the pattern of behavior that has emerged from NATO defense ministries since the Kinzhal's operational debut. Lockheed Martin, one of the primary developers and manufacturers of the Patriot missile defense systems that NATO countries rely upon, has accelerated development timelines for next-generation interceptor capabilities in ways that align with the specific performance envelope represented by hypersonic maneuvering targets. That acceleration is not explained by public statements, but it is documented in contracting records and development announcements that are publicly accessible to anyone willing to look. When defense contractors begin spending money on specific capability gaps, they are typically responding to assessments that those capability gaps are real. The United States Army has acknowledged in public budget documents the need for enhanced capability against hypersonic threats, language that would be unnecessary if existing systems were assessed as adequate. Perhaps the most significant external validation comes not from Russian sources, but from the European defense analytical community. The International Institute for Strategic Studies, which is headquartered in London and carries substantial credibility in Western defense policy circles, published assessment material noting that hypersonic glide vehicles and air-launched hypersonic ballistic missiles represent a category of threat for which current NATO integrated air defense architecture has meaningful coverage gaps. Read that again. Not a Russian think tank, not Iranian state media. The International Institute for Strategic Studies, citing specific performance characteristics that align precisely with the documented Kinzhal envelope, acknowledged that current NATO air defense architecture has meaningful coverage gaps against this category of weapon. Let that sink in for a moment. The Western defense analytical establishment, the institutions that advise NATO governments and inform NATO planning, have gone on record acknowledging a capability gap that the Kinzhal strike on that underground bunker just demonstrated in operationally decisive fashion. The strategic implications of what has just been demonstrated extend far beyond the immediate tactical outcome of a single strike, regardless of how significant that strike was in isolation. NATO's entire posture in the current strategic environment rests on a series of assumptions about what is survivable and what is not. Underground command and control infrastructure has been central to those survivability assumptions for decades. NATO's continuity of command planning, the doctrine that ensures alliance decision-making and operational coordination can continue even under sustained conventional attack, depends heavily on the premise that deeply buried, heavily reinforced facilities can maintain functionality through everything short of nuclear detonation. That premise has now been empirically tested against a weapon system that NATO members actually face, and the result of that test is a destroyed bunker that was built specifically to survive. If you are watching this, and you understand what that means for NATO's forward posture in Eastern Europe, for the underground command infrastructure that alliance members have invested billions constructing, for the deterrence calculus that rests on assumptions of survivable command architecture, then share this video right now. Click the like button. Help more people understand what is actually happening in the strategic environment, because the briefings that matter are not the ones you see at press conferences. The specific implications for Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states, which have been investing heavily in NATO-standard hardened infrastructure under the assumption of conventional survivability, are direct and immediate. Defense planners in Warsaw, Bucharest, and Vilnius are now operating with the knowledge that a weapon exists in Russia's operational inventory that can defeat the hardened infrastructure they have been building and into which they have been moving critical command elements. The response options are not straightforward. Deeper burial requires geological conditions that are not uniformly available across Eastern Europe. Additional reinforcement can partially compensate, but does not address the fundamental penetration physics that hypersonic terminal velocity creates. Dispersion and mobility, moving critical command functions away from fixed, hardened sites into mobile platforms, represents a conceptually sound response, but requires operational adjustments that take years to implement fully and create their own vulnerability patterns. The timeline on all of these adaptations is measured in years. The Kinzhal is operational now. That gap between current vulnerability and future adaptation represents a strategic window that sophisticated military planners on the Russian side are well aware of and have presumably factored into their operational planning. The United States response has been to accelerate hypersonic defense program timelines, with the Glide Phase Interceptor program receiving increased funding and priority in recent defense appropriations cycle. However, program assessments from the Congressional Budget Office and Government Accountability Office have noted that even accelerated timelines place initial operational capability years away from the present moment. In the interim, the capability gap demonstrated by the bunker strike persists. It is worth noting, because honest analysis requires it, that official NATO statements in the aftermath of this strike have not characterized the event in the terms that the operational evidence appears to support. Alliance spokespersons have emphasized the resilience of NATO defensive architecture, have pointed to ongoing investments in air and missile defense capability enhancement, and have generally framed Russian hypersonic capability claims as partially exaggerated for psychological effect. The United States European Command issued statements emphasizing continued confidence in the integrated air defense network that protects alliance territory and NATO's forward-positioned forces. These statements deserve neither automatic dismissal nor automatic acceptance. The competing narratives, Russia claiming decisive penetration of hardened infrastructure and NATO emphasizing continued defensive confidence, reflect the information environment of active strategic competition, in which both sides have strong incentives to shape perceptions in their favor. Russian claims about the Kinzhal's performance have historically been accompanied by performance specifications that some Western analysts have characterized as partially exaggerated. The documented operational use does not always align with the most extreme performance parameters claimed by Russian officials. At the same time, the pattern of Western behavior following Kinzhal deployments, the accelerated investment in hypersonic defense, the acknowledgement of capability gaps from credible Western analytical institutions, and the observable changes in NATO posture and infrastructure planning, all suggest that the dismissal of Russian hypersonic capability by official NATO communications does not reflect the private assessments of the people responsible for actually defending alliance territory. The gap between what officials say publicly and what defense contractors are being paid to solve privately tells its own story about the seriousness with which Western militaries are actually treating this threat. What the destroyed bunker represents is not merely a tactical outcome in an ongoing conflict. It represents a data point that has been fed into strategic calculations in every NATO capital simultaneously. 7 decades of investment in underground hardened infrastructure as the survivable backbone of command continuity has encountered a weapon that does not accept the engineering assumptions that infrastructure was built around. The men and women responsible for NATO defense planning are now working through what that means, not in press conferences, but in the kind of classified working groups where honest assessments are actually conducted. Legal Lens USA will continue bringing you the analysis that connects these developments to their strategic consequences as this situation evolves, and we will not sanitize that analysis to fit a narrative that minimizes what Western militaries are privately telling themselves. This is the story that matters. The underground architecture that was supposed to guarantee command survival did not survive. The Kinzhal system that achieved that outcome is operational in numbers sufficient for sustained use. And the NATO response, however well-resourced and urgently pursued, is years away from closing the gap that this strike has just demonstrated in operationally decisive terms. The question for every NATO defense planner, and frankly for every informed citizen watching this, is what decisions get made in the years between now and when that gap finally closes. Do you believe NATO has a credible near-term answer to this capability, or is the accelerated investment program an acknowledgement that the answer right now simply does not exist? Drop your analysis in the comments below, because this community produces the kind of geopolitical thinking that deserves to be heard. And this conversation is too important to leave to official spokespeople, whose job is managing perceptions rather than confronting realities.